for investment. There's a thriving startup ecosystem, but how much of it is leading innovation? These questions need answers and analysis. But first, let's look at the roadmap to number one in 2050. Here are three scenarios that I want to break down for you. In the first scenario, we want to project a required real GDP growth rate of about 7.3% year on year, for which viewers' nominal GDP would rise to about $33 to $36 trillion by 2047. Per capita GDP would reach about $18,000 to about $20,000, assuming population stabilizes near the 1.8 billion mark. The key conditions are, of course, boost of exports, 21% rather of GDP to about 30%, large-scale skilling programs, state-led industrial policy push. There are, of course, many other things, but these three stand out. In the second scenario, required real GDP growth of about 7.8% year on year. If we were to target that, then viewers, we would have a nominal GDP in 2047 of about $36 to $40 trillion, a per capita GDP of about 20,000 to about 22,000 US dollars, which assumes, of course, the investment rate of about 40% of GDP by 2035. Labor force participation, especially women, rises to OECD averages, and productivity growth to about 4% annually. Strong manufacturing and service export expansion would be required to achieve this scenario. In scenario 3, we up the stakes and we say that required real GDP growth should be about 8 to 8.2% year on year, right up till 2047. In that case, nominal GDP in 2047 would be about $40 to $45 trillion. Per capita GDP would be about 22 to about 25,000 US dollars. And they are based on assumptions again: aggressive infrastructure investment, 10% plus of GDP annually, leapfrogging in green tech, AI and advanced manufacturing, and structural reforms in land, labor and capital markets, global supply chain, reshoring benefiting India. All of that needs to kick in. Now, viewers, you're seeing on your screens that each scenario is backed with a lot of research. The source is there, so these numbers are pretty accurate. And therefore, let's talk about this roadmap. Is it attainable? What are the challenges? What are the key inherent strengths India has that we can build upon? And we have with us tonight unparalleled panel. Sanjeev Sanyal, he needs no introduction. He is the advisor to the Prime Minister of India. We also have with us ex-CEO of the Niti Aayog, former Sherpa of India's great outreach globally, and written a fantastic book, Amitabh Kant. And we also have Monica Hullen, who is a financial educator, someone whose books have sold millions of copies. So these three individuals will have an interesting, informed conversation. Let me begin with you, Sanjeev Sanyal. At 8% growth, India just about reaches high income status by 2047. I painted those scenarios. But to get to 8%, we need next generation reforms, you'd agree. Would you say Prime Minister Modi's tenure has been conservative with reforms? There's always this sort of heartache in the Financial Times and this, that, the other, that we could have done a lot more. So I want your take on this.
So, Rahul, let me say, I won't quibble about the modeling. All the economists would probably get into that. But look, there have been a large amount of reforms. I mean, there are many reforms like the introduction of GST, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the inflation targeting, the management of the economy, although not a reform, but the management of the economy through the COVID years. All of them have been quite revolutionary. So I don't think you can say that there haven't been reforms. But of course, we can always do more. And I would say you missed out perhaps the biggest reform that India needs for the next 25 years, which is the enforcement of contracts and the reform consequently of the legal system. I would argue that that would be the single biggest constraint to very high rate of growth, because that is, if you can't enforce contracts in a timely manner, most of the other things will, simply not happen. So I would put that at the top of the agenda. Second big thing that I would put in there is municipal delivery. when we were 30 years back, when we were a much poorer country, our cities used to be actually cleaner than they are today. So we are literally sinking into our own garbage. We need to carry out a major cleanup of our cities, towns, and villages. And I would put that as a second most important thing in there. And of course, there are all the other things that you've also mentioned, ramping up investment and so on. But these two I would add in the list of things we need to do over the next 25 years.
So let me just follow through before I open this up further. The tariff shock, you can call it that if you want, etc., or sort of a black swan event, has shown that India's economy needs to be very resilient. I mean, that's pretty obvious. How does India de-risk from shocks without slowing reform, sir?
Well, I mean, you can't completely de-risk. We do live in the world we live in. So rather than get obsessed about this particular tariff shock, the fact is the world is always risky. Sometimes you'll have the COVID shock. Sometimes you'll have the global financial crisis, the Asian crisis. All kinds of things will happen. So to say that we can de-risk is not the thing. What we need is resilience, not de-risking. And for that, let me say that there are a few things we have done which are extraordinary. We now have one of the most well-capitalized financial systems. Inflation is very well anchored for the last 9 years since we have introduced the inflation targeting system. Our external accounts are in good shape. So in fact, despite these difficult circumstances, actually we have the monetary and fiscal space to actually accelerate growth, both through reforms, but even through actual, commonplace monetary fiscal stimulus. So I would argue that a 7% sustainable growth rate can be made our baseline, given the foundations that we have created. But that does require that we keep doing reforms forward as well. So it's not something we can rest on our laurels, but it does mean that we can push forward despite the turbulence outside.
Well, of course, that will also require a lot of, in fact, political stability, viewers. Let's not discount that. We're a democracy at the end of the day. There's always give and take, but if you have a stable core at the center, strong mandates, you can push through reforms with lesser friction. I won't say without friction, but with lesser friction. Amitabh Kant, let me bring you into this conversation. We've set grand visions before. Make in India, smart cities. Look, we can debate on how successful we've been in re-altering, in attaining those goals, but we can definitely say that the results have been mixed, okay? If we start with that baseline, what is different this time? That we should imagine that in the next 25 years, dramatically things are going to alter and put us on this great course that we have charted.
So Rahul, first of all, we are a $4 trillion economy aiming to be close to a $35 trillion economy by the time we turn 100. And this would require a vast number of structural reforms in the economy. To my mind, the present tariff shock on us actually should galvanize us into major reforms. And to my mind, there are several reforms. One is we need to simplify goods and services tax into a very simple two-slab regime. We need to bring down our statutory liquidity ratio, which is very high at 18%, and therefore banks have to buy government bonds and the interest rates are very high. We need to bring down our interest rates very low. We need also to carry out major structural reforms in terms of management, which Sanjeev alluded to, about managing our cities, because cities are going to be drivers of innovation and growth. We need to focus very heavily on research and development. And to my mind, tourism has to be a big driver of growth. It is tariff proof. And this can, India is on the verge of buying about 1,800 planes. We should not make that an avenue for outbound tourism, but for driving growth. Now, in history, post-World War II, Japan has grown at very high rates, close to about 9.6% for 2.5 decades. Korea did that in the 70s, and in recent times, China has done it. So to my mind, 7%, which Sanjeev is talking about, is very modest. We should not aim for anything less than 8.5%. We should be ambitious, but this would require huge structural reforms and elimination of red tape, eliminating labor laws which exist at present, and pushing for strategic disinvestment and asset monetization in a very big way, and pushing the spirit of free enterprise in India. The more free enterprise you have, and government acting as a mere catalyst, will enable India to grow in the long run. Very few countries in the world have been able to do it. Most of them have got caught in the middle income trap. The challenge for India is really to be a very reform-oriented free enterprise country to be able to do this in the coming years.
Okay, and are you optimistic? We've seen, for example, a dramatic proposal to push 3 farm laws, Mr. Kant. And that came when Mr. Modi had a phenomenal majority in parliament, but we saw, a pushback and we saw a surrender. There's no other way of saying it, sorry. But that was disappointing. We've also seen in the past, the labor code, for example, hangs fire. There are this very other important sheaf of reforms that Sanjeev Sanyal was talking about, the reforms, the judiciary, etc., etc. We're not seeing any real momentum in that direction. That worries me. Does that worry you?
Rahul, I'm extremely optimistic because we are the only country which has lifted close to about 250 million people above the multidimensional poverty line. We are the only country which has digitized its economy in a very big way, from fast payments to insurance to stock market. Everything is done digitally within 30 seconds to 60 seconds. We are the only country which is clocking about 30 kilometers of roads and 12 kilometers of railway line. And we've pushed for green energy in a very big way. We've increased our green energy 31x in the last 7 years. So I'm extremely optimistic about this. We need huge amount of administrative and political will to drive this, and a very clear ambition and a very clear vision that we are going to achieve consistent rates of growth to be able to be a $35 trillion economy.
Okay, Monica Hallan, high GDP, and this is a conversation that happens every time GDP numbers are announced, and if they are buoyant, the opposition will tell you, anyone that is sort of intrinsically objective about our performance will tell you that it doesn't automatically translate into high household prosperity. I mean, there is this huge differential between the rich and the poor in our country. How do we ensure Viksit Bharat translates into a Viksit Parivar or, Viksit family? How do we ensure this?
I think we've actually done very well, counter to what the narrative in the world is on inequality. So India was handed a challenge of being a poor country with welfare asks, right, at independence.
Yes.
Before being rich, we were put on the path of welfare economics, where you needed to distribute before you had enough money. But looking at the data, looking at what we have managed to do, lifting off 270 million people out of poverty in the last decade, the middle class is now a good 32% of the population, right? So there's been a pouring of population into the middle class, which is only going to increase. And if you measure inequality, whether it is consumption or income, so India's consumption equality actually has fallen over time, and this is World Bank data. Okay, it's standing at a number of 25. Now, you have to have a handle to measure inequality. I would rather use World Bank data than a private set of data by somebody in France, right? So let me use World Bank data and say, look, we have not just managed growth, we have managed growth with redistribution, lifting people out of poverty, increasing the middle class, right? So that's where we are at. So that's the situation today.
Okay.
Going ahead, what is the strength? The greatest strength of the country is an aspirational India. when you see the West, you see the fatigue, you see the high per capita incomes have dulled that fire in the belly. Here you have this mass of population who has just escaped poverty, and what do they want? They want a house, they want a vehicle, they want to travel. This is the fire which will light the growth path ahead, right? So that is the greatest part. And when you have this population, where is the underlying? We have an underlying macro picture which is looking very good.
Right.
Like Sanjeev said, our inflation is under control. The fiscal deficit, because of FRBM targets, is on that glide path. The balance sheets, the bank balance sheets have been cleaned up. So we are in a good place as far as house cleaning goes. So if I can put it in the context for your viewer, which household is better positioned to grow? Somebody laden over by debt, consumption debt, or somebody who's got no debt and is able to now make deployments to build new assets. So we are in that position of that house who's debt-free and is now beginning to buy assets. But for me, the biggest challenge is that the country faces is this endemic, gut, soul-seeping corruption which pervades. Some of us had actually thought it would go down over time. It has only increased. So there are rate cards for every paper you want to move across the government, doesn't matter BJP or any other party's governments. It is at the state level most eminently visible that everything you want to do has a rate, right? And this is government servants who not just get their salary and their perks and their health benefits, but that is like an underlying. On top of that, that corruption money has to be given. So for a citizen, it is so difficult to navigate this corruption, which does not seem to go away. So, for a income tax-paying Indian, we are hit several times. We are hit by the taxes that we pay, which is fair enough. We are paying for the country to grow.
Right.
But corruption is adding at least 10% to the cost. And in terms of real estate, it's adding 50% at least to the cost.
Okay.
So again, as a honest Indian taxpayer, you're paying and paying and paying. So that's as far as the individual is concerned. You try setting up a business in the country.
Right.
The compliance laws get you. You are smart enough to still overstep that. The inspector Raj will get you. Right? So unless we have this ground level reform, and a lot of this has to do with the states. Center can do so much, but I think the ball has to be lobbed really to the states. Like Sanjeev said, the municipalities are a mess. The urban lived reality is terrible, with garbage, with cattle, with dysfunctional services. So those are the issues that I have in mind, that once we have a handle on corruption, I think you will see 1 million entrepreneurial shoots coming up automatically, which again take the country forward.
So you basically, let me bring in Sanjeev Sanyal and Amitabh Kant. You've defined the elephant in the room as this cancer of corruption that is corroding any attempt at enterprise. Sanjeev Sanyal, do you agree with this assessment? And how far should we go, therefore, in then challenging the goals that we've set for ourselves? Because if it's endemic and no one seems to have a handle over it, we've got a real problem.
I mean, there is no doubt that rent seeking is an issue in the government. It was certainly an issue, in fact, been an issue for decades in this country. And despite a lot of efforts being put in from the top, the real problem is that the rent seeking, where the rubber hits the road, has continued to exist. And I have argued many times that while we are doing these great structural reforms, much of this rent seeking and friction, it's not just the rent seeking part, just the friction of it. So some of it is rent seeking, some of it is harassment, some of it is delay. Let's just call it friction. This friction has to be removed through something I call process reforms. There are literally thousands of them to be done. While we can, do the odd big picture structural reform, much of the friction in the system happens because, rule number 78, subsection D, some 3 words have to be changed. because of which, there are months of delays in a process. I mean, so this is a huge, huge issue. And it requires, interestingly, a mindset change, both in the bureaucracy and the judiciary, of course, but actually in the population at large. And let me tell you, because now I have been spending a lot of time trying to clean up these hundreds of these I've probably successfully done. Let me tell you a major problem. The problem is most of these are actually inserted, these wrinkles in the system may be getting inserted deliberately by rent-seeking officials or whatever may be the case. But a large source of this is a nationwide mindset that India has, which is that for every problem, you need a Mai Baap Sarkar. The price India pays for this mindset is this, that effectively you introduce any problem into the thing, some series of large numbers of rules will be created or some scheme will be created to solve that problem. Whereas in most other countries, you would allow private enterprise to creative destruction to solve it, which is what Mr. Kant was earlier talking about. We've got to have more faith in our private sector solving problems. But in India, our default is nahi, some Mai Baap Sarkar thing has to be done. Now, of course, but even if that particular problem gets solved, it creates so many wrinkles in the system to create all of these rent-seeking, frictions, harassment, all these other things that appear because of this.
So, Mr. Kant, since your name was invoked, let me bring you into this. You've dealt with, you've been the external face of an outreach, G20, you put it all together. It was a monumental task. You've written a beautiful book. We've all read it and we've discussed it, and it tells us so many things. So, look, I mean, the government, what's stopping the government from cutting all this regulation, this red tape, this sort of compliance law, Inspector Raj, that sort of works tandem? It's like the story that, we've been here before. We've told this story so many times. We've shot ourselves in the foot over this red tape. We've tripped over it. Why are we still tripping over it?
So Rahul, I've worked on this very closely as Secretary Industries when we worked on ease of doing business. And that time India jumped up 79 positions in the World Bank ease of doing business. It was a big jump. But this is a constant effort. And, to my mind, no form in government should be more than 6 or 7 columns. There should be no rules made to an act should be more than 1 page, and no act in India should be more than 2 pages. They should all be simplified because we've created large number of vast clauses and subsections, and which leads to very muddled thinking. That actually it's a lack of clarity of mind by the lawmakers which leads to rent seeking. That's number one. Number two is Government of India has done a lot in this direction. It's scrapped close to about 1700 laws. I think the real action lies in the states now. The real rent seeking is in the states, and the challenge for India is that it will not be possible for India to grow without the states growing.
So if you want, I'm not wanting to make this political, Mr. Kant, but let me ask you this. A large number of states, the biggest ones today in the union, are run by the BJP. The double engine is the important proviso. Like, look, we have one in the center, we'll work in tandem, we'll get things done. So we know the problems. Why aren't they being resolved fast enough? Who is holding this up?
Yeah. So, Rahul, let's look at it without the politics bit of it.
Sure.
That, if you want India to grow, the western part of India and the southern part of India have already grown at high rates, so their base level is high. What you need to do is to make UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, where the base levels have been low, and these are the most populous states of India. So if you want to grow with equity, they account for about 55% of your population. And if these states grow rapidly, and they are also the mineral-rich states of India, including Orissa, if these states grow rapidly, then India is transformed. Without the eastern part of India growing rapidly, it will be very difficult for India to grow consistently at about 8.5%. That's number one, that you need the eastern part of India to grow rapidly. And second is that India is growing on the back of very few large companies. You need another 10,000 large companies to make India grow, because large companies then create their own ecosystem of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 producers who then supply to the large company. So you can't grow on the back of very few large companies. You need to create a vast number of large companies which are innovative, where there's a lot of R&D taking place, and which then have backward forward linkages to the medium and small enterprises. Without that, it will be very difficult for India to grow.
Okay, so let's just shift a little bit of focus here, because there are two conversations that are constantly had anywhere you go. First is this, it's slightly a political conversation, Monica Hullen, but I have to ask you this. What guardrails can prevent a growth story from becoming an inequality story? You talked about the United States, the West, the examples there. Yes, GDP grew, but we've also seen incipient inequality. Of course, you could say that it's not the kind of dire inequality or poverty that we see in India, but there is enough. Do you see us moving towards UBI, inheritance tax, urban land ceiling, all this other stuff to sort of narrow the gap quicker? Do we need to go down that route? Because, the opposition makes a huge song and dance about it. And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be insensitive. Maybe they have a point. I don't know.
The only metric I have to measure inequality is the Gini coefficient. Okay, yeah. So Gini is essentially, it is 1 if one person has all the wealth, and 0 if it's perfectly equal. Right? So the Indian Gini at 25 is lower than what you see in US, UK, Germany, South Africa. So if purely on the metric of a World Bank coefficient called Gini, we actually do better. Now it is, so basically the gap, the inequality in consumption is not as great as it is the income inequality in the countries I have mentioned. So I think it's unfair to say that we are getting more unequal. And it's also counterintuitive to think that as people are escaping dire poverty, pouring into the middle class, that inequality is worsening. You look out of your window and you see a poor person and you say, oh, we are poor. That is not the way to deal with this problem. The way to deal with this problem is to look at data. And when you look at data, India is showing lower levels of inequality than before. So again, I can only encourage everybody to look at data sets which are impartial and then make up their minds as to what is the India story, rather than pick something which is a private data set and then make these broad statements.
So the question is, we don't need things like, as I said, UBI, inheritance tax, urban land ceiling, all of that. We don't need all that. We're okay. We're going along fine.
Our marginal income tax rate in the new tax regime is 39%, and in the old tax regime is 42%. I think we are taxing our rich extremely high rates of taxation, given the kind of infrastructure we give. So I don't see any point of, finally, if you keep taxing, capital will flow, rich people will exit. And this has been the case in country after country. You take too much and you lose the largest part of your tax-paying population. So you need to do it. You need to do it in a manner where they will stay and pay. Now, you push the pedal harder, you will see exits, and that's not what we want at all.
Okay, Sanjeev Sanyal, where do you come in on this question?
So, as I said, I have always made the case that, first of all, if you look at consumption Gini coefficient, as Monica just pointed out, we are reasonably equal. Now, that doesn't mean that our incomes are equal, but I have always stated that, first and foremost, we need to look at absolute poverty without getting into how many billionaires India has. And the fact is, we have removed 270 million people out of extreme poverty in the last decade or so, which is non-trivial. Secondly, all those reports written about how we are unequal, etc., it's quite amusing that most of those reports are actually funded by the following institutions: Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Omidyar Foundation, Soros's Open Society Foundation. Now, who are all these people? Who is Ford? Who is Soros? Who is Omidyar? They are all billionaires. then main problem seems to be Adani, Ambani, or when we were children, that used to be Tata, Birla. So the problem seems to be not with billionaires, but with Indian billionaires. I think the real problem here is a general problem, which we now are seeing also showing through in this tariff war, which is that as we rise, we will be beaten by these foreign agencies, foreign commentators of various kinds, who will try to show us in bad light. We should not be thrown off by this. Okay. What we should concentrate on, which is what Mr. Kant also mentioned, is to focus on keeping our growth going. That is our best bet. And I say that, even with a reasonable level of reform, which is doable, and given the fact that our fiscal, monetary, and other systems are in good shape, our financial system is good shape, managing a 7% GDP growth rate as a baseline is very, very doable. Okay. And in fact, if we get a clear road somewhere, hitting even 8.5 for long periods of time is actually doable. So actually, the real issue is really within, and we shouldn't get swayed into these arcane debates about inequality, which, as I said, are in any case not based on sound research.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective. It's been an enlightening conversation. Let's hope, viewers, that we can leapfrog also, and this is a point that I'll perhaps leave everyone to ponder, we can leapfrog into a green industrial superpower without also sacrificing growth, because the ease of living is very, very important too.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
साथियों, इस दिवाली में आपकी डबल दिवाली का काम मैं करने वाला हूं। इस दिवाली में आपको एक बहुत बड़ा तोहफा देशवासियों को मिलने वाला है। पिछले 8 साल से हमने जीएसटी का बहुत बड़ा रिफॉर्म किया। पूरे देश में टैक्स के बर्डन को कम किया, टैक्स की व्यवस्थाओं को सरल किया, और 8 साल के बाद समय की मांग है कि हम एक बार उसको रिव्यू करें। हमने एक हाई पावर कमेटी को बिठा करके रिव्यू शुरू किया, राज्यों से भी विचार विमर्श किया, और मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, हम नेक्स्ट जनरेशन जीएसटी रिफॉर्म्स लेकर के आ रहे हैं। ये दिवाली के अंदर आपके लिए तोहफा बन जाएंगे। सामान्य मानवीय की जरूरतों के टैक्स भारी मात्रा में कम कर दिए जाएंगे। बहुत बड़ी सुविधा बढ़ेगी। हमारे एमएसएमई, हमारे लघु उद्यमी, इनको बहुत बड़ा लाभ मिलेगा। रोजमर्रा की चीजें बहुत सस्ती हो जाएगी, और उससे इकोनॉमी को भी एक नया बल मिलने वाला है। मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, आज देश तीसरी बड़ी इकोनॉमी बनने के लिए समय है, तेज गति से आगे बढ़ रहा है। हम दरवाजे खटखटा रहे हैं, और बहुत तेजी से हम उसको अचीव भी कर लेंगे। और कोई तो दिन होगा, मैं आपके बीच आकर के लाल किले की प्राचीर से ये खबर भी सुनाऊंगा। आज भारत की अर्थव्यवस्था और आर्थिक स्थिति को लेकर पूरी दुनिया आश्वस्त है। इतनी अस्थिरता के बीच आशा की किरण बना हुआ है भारत का फाइनेंशियल डिसिप्लिन, भारत की फाइनेंस की ऊर्जा। संकट के घेरे में जब अर्थव्यवस्था पड़ी हुई है, तब भारत ही उसे बाहर निकलेगा, ये भरोसा दुनिया में पनपा है। आज इन्फ्लेशन कंट्रोल में है, फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व हमारे बहुत मजबूत है। हमारे मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स बहुत मजबूत है। ग्लोबल रेटिंग एजेंसी भी लगातार भारत की सराहना करती हैं। भारत की अर्थव्यवस्था पर ज्यादा से ज्यादा विश्वास व्यक्त कर रही है। ये बढ़ती हुई अर्थव्यवस्था का लाभ मेरे देश के गरीबों को मिले, मेरे देश के किसानों को मिले, मेरे देश की नारी शक्ति को मिले, मेरे देश के मध्यम वर्ग को मिले, मेरे देश की विकास धारा को ताकत देने वाला बने। उस दिशा में हम नए नए प्रयास करें। आज युवाओं के लिए नए नए सेक्टर में हमारे नौजवानों के लिए अवसर बन रहे हैं। स्किल डेवलपमेंट, स्वरोजगार, बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियों में इंटर्नशिप, इस पर एक बहुत बड़े स्तर पर अभियान चल रहा है। साथियों, इस दिवाली में आपकी डबल दिवाली का काम मैं करने वाला हूं। इस दिवाली में आपको एक बहुत बड़ा तोहफा देशवासियों को मिलने वाला है। पिछले 8 साल से हमने जीएसटी का बहुत बड़ा रिफॉर्म किया। पूरे देश में टैक्स के बर्डन को कम किया, टैक्स की व्यवस्थाओं को सरल किया और 8 साल के बाद समय की मांग है कि हम एक बार उसको रिव्यू करें। हमने एक हाई पावर कमेटी को बिठा करके रिव्यू शुरू किया, राज्यों से भी विचार विमर्श किया और मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, हम नेक्स्ट जनरेशन जीएसटी रिफॉर्म्स लेकर के आ रहे हैं। ये दिवाली के अंदर आपके लिए तोहफा बन जाएंगे। सामान्य मानवीय की जरूरतों के टैक्स भारी मात्रा में कम कर दिए जाएंगे। बहुत बड़ी सुविधा बढ़ेगी। हमारे एमएसएमई, हमारे लघु उद्यमी, इनको बहुत बड़ा लाभ मिलेगा।
Now, turning our attentions, viewers, in just a few hours, a meeting that has the world transfixed will begin. That President Putin is being hosted by President Trump, and that too on American soil, has raised considerable hopes for a peace deal that will end the Ukraine-Russia war at the heart of Europe and perhaps also prove consequential for the rest of the world. But make no mistake, New Delhi will be tracking every minute of this interaction. Every gesture, every word, it will examine with a fine-tooth comb. India has stakes in the outcome. Failure to arrive at a deal in Alaska would not be good news for India. But what about a successful end to the peace talks? Does a ceasefire guarantee tariff relief or smoother relations between DC and Delhi? How will India's position in its own backyard, the Indo-Pacific, be impacted by the confabulations in Alaska? Or will India find itself balancing ties with China, Russia and America simultaneously in a fraught game of diplomatic jugglery? India is already cranking up the diplomatic levers with China and Russia, and PM Modi may even be traveling to the United States for the UNGA session, where a meeting on the sidelines in September end with President Trump is a distinct possibility, though it's not confirmed. Let's break it all down, all these scenarios, viewers, and we are joined by tonight a very, very, very informed panel. We have with us former Foreign Secretary Kamal Sibal. He's also, of course, been ambassador, widely heralded to big countries like the United States. There's also Sushant Sareen with us, strategic analyst, and also Brahma Chellaney, strategic expert. None of these people need an introduction, but I'm going to begin with you, Mr. Sibal, and I'm going to ask you to, in some ways, game theory this a little bit for our viewers. If talks in Alaska lead to sanctions against Russia easing, could India double down on cheap oil and even arms from Moscow, or will DC expect a quid pro quo from us in return? What do you think is going to be the likely scenario here?
Well, firstly, we didn't start the Ukraine war, and if the Ukraine conflict ends, it will bring us certain advantages, no doubt, but we have practically no role in it apart from generally saying that this is not an era of war and that we favor dialogue and diplomacy. Prime Minister has visited Putin, spoken to him, he's visited Zelensky. So there have been conversations, but we are not being players where we can actually then tell Trump or Putin for that matter that we have been helpful in you being able to reach some kind of a solution of sorts on this conflict. That's one. Therefore, I wouldn't like to link the possibility of a solution or the lack of possibility of a solution with India, except for the fact that if there is some kind of a solution, then Trump's ploy to announce a penalty of additional 25% tariffs because we are having defense deals with Russia and we are buying Russian oil, and gave himself 21 days during which he thought that there could be some forward movement on this front with Putin, that would become, in a sense, OTOs. That won't be relevant anymore. There will be no sense in imposing those tariffs when he's himself opening up, and if, as you said, there's a possibility of lifting some sanctions, etc., etc. On the other hand, if it doesn't work out as intended, why should India be punished? I mean, what have we done in order to put a spanner in the works? Europe is putting a spanner in the works. Zelensky is putting a spanner in the works, and both of them are trying very hard to derail this conversation in Alaska, whereas we have said that we welcome this and that we think that there is an opening now for a peaceful solution, and in any way in which we can help, we are willing to do so. Therefore, there is no reason for Trump to try and punish us. That is the second part. The third is that I'm a bit surprised that there are these hopes that some solution can be found. I don't think that this dialogue in the first instance is going to produce any solution. Whether it will produce a ceasefire and in what time frame, I am also not sure, because the fundamental demands of Russia have been very clear, which is that, and Putin has said that again yesterday or today, that the ceasefire has to be part of a long-term and durable peace. But they're not discussing those durable elements, which is no membership for NATO and demilitarization of Ukraine. And okay, United States can say you can't enter NATO, it is in their hands. But when it comes to demilitarization, Europe is in fact wanting to militarize the conflict even more by not only spending more money on their own defense, but giving more money and arms to Zelensky. And they have this plan of putting their own peacekeepers on the ground. So these conditions are not going to be met. And I end by saying that Trump himself is tempering a little bit the expectations, saying that this will be a preliminary meeting. Rubio has said that Trump wants to be able to meet Putin face to face and judge him and assess what the situation is. And Trump has gone on record today to say that he hopes to have a second meeting very quickly, at which Zelensky may or may not be present. And if this doesn't happen, and if he comes to the conclusion that Putin is not serious, then he is going to unleash more sanctions.
Yeah, but on that point, Mr. Sibal, why is this threat being held out against New Delhi when it basically is not even a facilitator here? So why punish New Delhi? You must elaborate on this. Explain to our viewers.
Two reasons. One, he thought that he would have a much stronger hand to threaten Putin with sanctions if he told him that I am going to impose secondary sanctions on the biggest buyers of your oil, which is China and India. Now, China has rebuffed him. In fact, I understand that China told him, if you go down this road, that'll be the end of the dialogue with us. Consequently, he has given another 90 days. He has bought more time. He's not had the courage to inflict sanctions on China. We are a soft target. He's gone ahead and done it in our case, knowing that it is in his hands to be able to withdraw this 25% tariff if there's movement forward with Putin. And if not, this will be a ploy actually to pressure India to make more concessions on the trade front. Okay. Agriculture, dairy, and everything else. But his bluff has been called because India has also resisted. Prime Minister, in two different statements, has made it very clear that we have no intention to buckle under this pressure, saying that he's going to do everything possible to defend his farmers and his dairy people and his fishermen. So actually, Trump has gone there with a weaker hand. The expectation that he would have this weapon to wield against Putin has quite worked. Now, let's see what happens. I'll be a bit surprised if they actually reach any really positive outcome.
Okay, so
and finally, I'd like to make one point that I find it surprising that Putin is accepting mediation by Trump. I don't know how he is relying on such an unpredictable person who can change his tune day after under this pressure or that pressure. But then Putin must have done his homework.
Well, that's an interesting question that has been thrown out there. Brahma Chellaney and Mr. Sareen, let me bring both of you in. Brahma Chellaney, let's for a moment suspend belief or even pessimism, and let's assume that Trump and Putin at least make enough headway in Alaska to continue this dialogue. It's certainly on a positive track and so forth. Will this thaw of sorts lessen Moscow's dependence on Beijing, and will India suddenly become less valuable, maybe even to the United States as a counterweight to China? Could that be a possibility?
Well, you're asking a fundamental question, but let's first ask a simple question. Why is Trump pushing for a Ukraine ceasefire? He's not doing it out of concern for the bloodshed. Certainly the bloodshed and the devastation and the genocide in Gaza are continuing on Trump's watch. He hasn't said a word on that. So he's not bothered about the killings in Ukraine. The reason why he's pushing for the ceasefire is because the West now faces possible defeat in the war. A scenario he's desperate to avoid because this would tarnish his legacy. So given Russia's continued advances in Ukraine, Trump has grown increasingly desperate for a ceasefire. And his meeting with Putin is the clearest sign yet of his growing desperation. Putin has the military momentum on his side. He is in no hurry to accept a ceasefire. The reason why he's meeting with Trump is because he wants to see whether, as part of an eventual agreement, the US would be willing to lift those stringent sanctions against Russia. No country in modern history has faced the kind of sanctions the US and the West have imposed on Russia. So it's not about the war that is driving Putin to meet with Trump. It is whether the US and its allies in the West would cease weaponizing finance and trying to strangle Russia's economy. But on the issue of China and India, let's be clear on one thing, that Trump has no problem with Russian oil. If he had a problem with Russian oil, he wouldn't be quiet on Europe's major imports of Russian energy. Europe contributes more to Russia's coffers than India does through its oil purchases. Nor would he have actually spared China, which is by far the world's biggest importer of Russian oil and gas. Russian oil is a pretext to strong-arm India into accepting a Trump-dictated trade agreement. That's all it is. It is a crude bargaining tactic to secure a bilateral trade deal on his terms. And the deal that he wants is not just about trade, about economic issues. As the Washington Post has highlighted, Trump is using trade deals to secure strategic and security interests of the US. He's demanding things which, in the past, no US administration ever thought could be brought into a trade negotiating ambit. Even in relation to India, we keep talking about the pressure on agricultural and dairy markets. That is not the only or even the main sticking point. We're not talking about what has appeared in the American media, quoting US officials on what the US is seeking from India. What the US is seeking to do is to bind India more closely to US strategic and security interests. It's seeking to bend India to its will in a way that would actually undermine, compromise India's traditionally independent approach to global affairs. So it's not a trade deal that they are asking for. They're asking for something more fundamental. They have pushed U.S. policy from the time of Biden, has pushed Russia closer to China. And now, as we see from Modi's own upcoming trip to China, they're impelling India to seek a thaw with China. In other words, they're compounding their original mistake of creating this Sino-Russian strategic axis. Now they are forcing India, despite the presence of Chinese troops still in the occupied areas of eastern Ladakh, they're impelling India to seek a thaw with China. So this is clearly counterproductive to America's own long-term interests, but this is how. When you focus on short-term considerations, you lose track of longer-term interests.
Okay, I'll pick up on this. Mr. Sareen, let me come to you. What, from your perspective, is at stake for India here? Do we win? I mean, relatively speaking, if these two gentlemen can shake hands and come to some sort of an agreement, or is it just a lose-lose situation for us? We're just bystanders.
I think it's a lose-lose situation. When we look at the outcome of what will happen in Alaska, it reminds me of, whenever we used to go and play cricket tournaments or hockey tournaments, invariably we were not relying upon the strength of our team, but upon the draw it would get, whether we will reach the semi-finals or not. And I think we are doing something similar now. It doesn't matter. I would be very surprised if in that one meeting, Trump and Putin are able to sort out all their issues and the sanctions come off and they take away the penalties imposed on India. But even if supposing that was to happen, how does that resolve the fundamental problems that have come up now between India and the United States? Some of it which Mr. Sibal has recounted and some of it which Brahma has just told us. These are very fundamental issues on how much India is willing to go with the US. We want a partnership with the United States. We want a very, very close and strategic partnership with them. But there are certain limits to it. Just as the Americans are not going to do certain things just because we want them to do it, we are not going to do certain things just because the Americans want us to do it. And if you look at American alliances and American relationships around the world, in those, you have a situation where what America wants, America gets from its allies. After these penalties were put, there were a lot of people in India who said, we need to diversify, we need to start looking at Europe. Now, suddenly the Americans are telling the Europeans that why don't you also start putting secondary sanctions on the Indians, something which the Europeans themselves have been already thinking of. And my question to people in India is that if a Europe which could not stand up for its own benefit against the Americans, do you think they are going to stand up to America for our sake and not impose secondary sanctions on us? So we need to be prepared for some really serious headwinds coming our way. If we want to, live in this thing that, okay, fine, if this summit goes off well, our necks will be out of the news, I don't think that's going to happen. The Americans want to interfere, come in very, very deep into our system, influence our policies, do a lot of things which many people earlier suspected them of wanting to try to do. Earlier, they were seducing us into it. Now they are bludgeoning us into what they want. And the choice is going to be for an Indian government, and it's not going to be an easy choice. It's going to be a difficult one because it will come with a lot of problems. It will come with a lot of economic problems. It will come with a lot of political and diplomatic challenges. And we need to decide whether we now want to reduce ourselves into becoming a vassal of the United States or have some degree of independence, some degree of autonomy, which we have cherished. I think that's a very stark choice staring us in the face. It might happen a week from now, it might happen 6 months from now, but that is the choice which is staring us in the face. I don't see how, like some of these Indians in the United States are saying that, listen, why don't you just, lump it and just kiss Donald Trump on his backside or wherever else he wants you to kiss them, kiss it. There are some people who are suggesting that. Yes. I don't see how that is going to be possible for any government in India to be able to do something like that. So I think our problems are not going to end simply because Putin and the Americans settle something, which again, I think is a pretty long shot. Because already you can see that Trump is trying to find some wriggle room for himself. You can already see that he is, playing that negotiating game by trying to tell Putin that he has to accept whatever is on offer. Between the two also, they seem to have come to some kind of an understanding of what the contours of a possible solution will be.
Viewers, we're no better off at the beginning of this debate and no better off at the end of it, because quite frankly, the only thing that is coming through is that let's not put our house and everything that we have at stake on what's going to happen in Alaska. I think that's the net outcome of this conversation we've had with three very enlightened minds. I'll leave it at this, viewers. We will, of course, be back giving you the updates and trying to square the circle. Once again, thank you for watching.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
साथियों, इस दिवाली में आपकी डबल दिवाली का काम मैं करने वाला हूं। इस दिवाली में आपको एक बहुत बड़ा तोहफा देशवासियों को मिलने वाला है। पिछले 8 साल से हमने जीएसटी का बहुत बड़ा रिफॉर्म किया। पूरे देश में टैक्स के बर्डन को कम किया, टैक्स की व्यवस्थाओं को सरल किया, और 8 साल के बाद समय की मांग है कि हम एक बार उसको रिव्यू करें। हमने एक हाई पावर कमेटी को बिठा करके रिव्यू शुरू किया, राज्यों से भी विचार विमर्श किया, और मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, हम नेक्स्ट जनरेशन जीएसटी रिफॉर्म्स लेकर के आ रहे हैं। ये दिवाली के अंदर आपके लिए तोहफा बन जाएंगे। सामान्य मानवीय की जरूरतों के टैक्स भारी मात्रा में कम कर दिए जाएंगे। बहुत बड़ी सुविधा बढ़ेगी। हमारे एमएसएमई, हमारे लघु उद्यमी, इनको बहुत बड़ा लाभ मिलेगा। रोजमर्रा की चीजें बहुत सस्ती हो जाएगी और उससे इकोनॉमी को भी एक नया बल मिलने वाला है। मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, आज देश तीसरी बड़ी इकोनॉमी बनने के लिए समय तेज गति से आगे बढ़ रहा है। हम दरवाजे खटखटा रहे हैं और बहुत तेजी से हम उसको अचीव भी कर लेंगे। और कोई तो दिन होगा मैं आपके बीच आकर के लाल किले की प्राचीर से ये खबर भी सुनाऊंगा। आज भारत की अर्थव्यवस्था और आर्थिक स्थिति को लेकर पूरी दुनिया आश्वस्त है। इतनी अस्थिरता के बीच आशा की किरण बना हुआ है भारत का फाइनेंशियल डिसिप्लिन, भारत की फाइनेंस की ऊर्जा। संकट के घेरे में जब अर्थव्यवस्था पड़ी हुई है, तब भारत ही उसे बाहर निकलेगा, ये भरोसा दुनिया में पनपा है। आज इन्फ्लेशन कंट्रोल में है, फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व हमारे बहुत मजबूत है, हमारे मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स बहुत मजबूत है। ग्लोबल रेटिंग एजेंसी भी लगातार भारत की सराहना करती हैं, भारत की अर्थव्यवस्था पर ज्यादा से ज्यादा विश्वास व्यक्त कर रही है। ये बढ़ती हुई अर्थव्यवस्था का लाभ मेरे देश के गरीबों को मिले, मेरे देश के किसानों को मिले, मेरे देश की नारी शक्ति को मिले, मेरे देश के मध्यम वर्ग को मिले, मेरे देश की विकास धारा को ताकत देने वाला बने। उस दिशा में हम नए नए प्रयास करें। आज युवाओं के लिए नए नए सेक्टर्स में हमारे नौजवानों के लिए अवसर बन रहे हैं। स्किल डेवलपमेंट, स्वरोजगार, बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियों में इंटर्नशिप, इस पर एक बहुत बड़े स्तर पर अभियान चल रहा है। साथियों, इस दिवाली में आपकी डबल दिवाली का काम मैं करने वाला हूं। इस दिवाली में आपको एक बहुत बड़ा तोहफा देशवासियों को मिलने वाला है। पिछले 8 साल से हमने जीएसटी का बहुत
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post, and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. All of India is celebrating today. It's our 79th Independence Day. Normally, this day is about symbolism and pride, but today was a lot more. It was about gratitude and forward thinking. Gratitude for the soldiers who kept us safe against Pakistan, who avenged the victims of Pahalgam, and forward thinking to navigate this challenging world of wars and tariffs. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed both. He delivered the longest Red Fort speech yet. We'll bring